Dr. Sarah Chen had seen many impossible things during her 5 years aboard the Galactic Medical Station Harmony, but nothing quite like this. The massive creature before her wheezed with each labored breath, its pale scales dulled by pain and infection. What should have been a magnificent dragon was instead a pitiful sight, an albino Zephyrian drake whose wings hung limp and useless at its sides. The beast's condition was heartbreaking. Hundreds of barnacle-like growths covered its hide, each one pulsing with a sickly purple light. These parasitic organisms had burrowed deep into the dragon's flesh, creating a network of infection that was slowly killing the noble creature. Sarah had read about Zephyrian drakes in her xenobiology texts, but seeing one in person was entirely different. Even in its weakened state, the dragon was beautiful in a haunting way. King Thaxor of the Zephyrian Empire stood nearby, his forearms crossed in obvious displeasure. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their pride and military might, and the king embodied these traits perfectly. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with skin like polished obsidian, he commanded respect wherever he went. His golden eyes held contempt as he watched Sarah examine his precious dragon. "Your reputation precedes you, human," Thaxor said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Though I wonder if the stories are exaggerated. How can a species that has barely left its home system hope to heal what our greatest healers could not?" Sarah ignored the insult and continued her examination. She had dealt with arrogant alien nobility before, and she knew that results spoke louder than words. Her hands moved carefully over the dragon's hide, feeling for the extent of the infection. The creature's breathing was shallow, and its body temperature was dangerously low. Whatever these parasites were, they were draining the life from their host. The dragon's name was Star Whisper, according to the medical files. It had served as King Thaxor's personal mount for over 2 centuries, carrying him into countless battles across the galaxy. The bond between Zephyrian royalty and their drakes was legendary, deeper than friendship, more profound than any human could understand. Losing Star Whisper would be like losing a part of his own soul. The barnacle-like organisms appear to be some form of energy parasite, Sarah said, running her scanner over the largest growth. They're not just feeding on flesh, they're draining the dragon's life force directly. That's why traditional treatments haven't worked. King Thaxor scoffed. "Our healers determined this weeks ago. The parasites are from the Shadow Nebula, where we fought the Void Collective last year. They are beyond cure. We have already accepted that Star Whisper must be put out of its misery." The casual way he spoke of ending the dragon's life made Sarah's blood boil. She had spent her entire career fighting for patients that others had given up on. The idea of surrendering without exhausting every possibility went against everything she believed in. "Have you tried quantum frequency disruption?" she asked, pulling up her portable medical database. "What about bioresonance therapy or cellular regeneration fields?" "Human medicine is primitive compared to our technology," Thaxor replied dismissively. "If Zephyrian science cannot save Star Whisper, then nothing can. I only agreed to this consultation because the Galactic Medical Council insisted." Sarah bit back her initial response. She had heard this kind of attitude countless times before. Many alien species viewed humans as newcomers to the galactic community, young, inexperienced, and naive. They saw human medicine as crude and ineffective compared to their advanced technologies. What they didn't understand was that human medicine was built on something different: adaptation, creativity, and an absolute refusal to give up. The dragon's eyes opened suddenly, fixing on Sarah with an intelligence that took her breath away. Despite its pain, Star Whisper seemed to recognize that she was trying to help. The creature made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. This magnificent being deserved better than a quick death. "I'd like to run some tests," Sarah said firmly. "I'll need tissue samples from the parasites, blood work, and a full bioscan. I also want to examine the dragon's neural pathways. There might be a connection we're missing." King Thaxor's golden eyes narrowed. "You waste precious time. Star Whisper suffers needlessly while you play with your toys." "Every patient deserves a chance," Sarah replied. "I've seen miracles happen when people refuse to give up. Human medicine might be young, but we've learned things that older civilizations have forgotten." The king's laugh was harsh and mocking. Such arrogance from such a primitive species. "Very well, human. You may play your games. But when you fail, as you surely will, I expect you to admit that Zephyrian science is superior to your crude methods." Sarah nodded curtly and began setting up her equipment. She had been challenged by alien royalty before and she had never backed down. As she worked, she could feel King Thaxor's contemptuous gaze on her back. Let him watch, she thought. Let him see what human determination could accomplish. Star Whisper's condition was critical, but Sarah had seen worse. The dragon's immune system was still fighting, and where there was fight, there was hope. She began her scans, documenting every detail of the parasite infection. Somewhere in the data, she would find the key to saving this magnificent creature's life. The real work was just beginning. Sarah worked through the night, her portable laboratory humming with activity around Star Whisper's resting form. The dragon had been moved to a specialized medical bay on the station, where Sarah could monitor its vital signs continuously. King Thaxor had reluctantly agreed to give her 48 hours before making the final decision about Star Whisper's fate. The test results were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The parasites weren't just feeding on the dragon's life force, they were actually rewriting its cellular structure at a molecular level. Each barnacle-like growth was essentially a biological transmitter, sending signals to the others in a complex network that spanned the dragon's entire body. They're communicating, Sarah murmured to herself, studying the energy patterns on her screen. They're working together like a hive mind. Dr. Korath, a Zephyrian healer with decades of experience, entered the medical bay carrying a tray of traditional healing crystals. His scales were a deep blue-green, and his movements held the careful precision of someone who had spent centuries perfecting his craft. The human still plays with her devices, he said to King Thaxor, who had remained in the medical bay all night. While Star Whisper's life ebbs away, she stares at meaningless data. Sarah looked up from her workstation. Dr. Korath, I've reviewed your treatment attempts. The energy crystals should have disrupted the parasite's life cycle. Why didn't they work? The Zephyrian healer's eyes flashed with annoyance. Our methods have been perfected over millennia. The failure is not in our technique, but in the nature of these particular parasites. They are beyond healing. Nothing is beyond healing, Sarah replied firmly. We just haven't found the right approach yet. Look at these scans. The parasites are using quantum entanglement to maintain their hive mind. That's why your energy disruption failed. You were attacking individual parasites instead of the network. King Thaxor stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Sarah's workstation. Explain this human nonsense in terms we can understand. Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing the dragon's nervous system overlaid with the parasite network. Imagine the parasites as soldiers in an army. You've been trying to kill them one by one, but they keep getting new orders from their commander. We need to cut off their communication lines first. Dr. Korath scoffed. Quantum entanglement cannot be disrupted by crude human technology. Our most advanced equipment failed to break their connection. That's because you were trying to overpower them, Sarah said. Sometimes the solution isn't about using more force, it's about being smarter. Human medicine has always been about adaptation and improvisation. We don't have the most advanced technology in the galaxy, so we've learned to think differently. She turned to her medical kit and pulled out what looked like a simple injection device. Both aliens stared at it with obvious skepticism. What is that primitive tool? King Thaxor demanded. Something your advanced technology probably can't do, Sarah said with a slight smile. It's a bioorganic neural disruptor. Instead of trying to break the quantum entanglement through brute force, it introduces a specific protein sequence that mimics the parasite's own communication signals. She began preparing the injection, her hands steady despite the pressure she felt from the watching aliens. The parasites will receive false commands from their own network. They'll essentially trick themselves into shutting down. Dr. Korath's scales shifted to a darker shade, a sign of anger in his species. This is impossible. No such technology exists in our databases. Because you've never needed to develop it, Sarah explained. Your species has incredible healing abilities naturally. Humans don't. We're fragile, short-lived, and prone to disease. So we've become very good at fighting things that want to kill us. She moved toward Star Whisper with the injection device. The dragon's eyes opened, and for a moment, Sarah felt that incredible intelligence studying her. The creature seemed to understand that this might be its last hope. King Thaxor placed a massive hand on Sarah's shoulder, stopping her. If you are wrong, human, you may accelerate Star Whisper's death. The parasites could respond violently to this disruption. Sarah met his golden gaze without flinching. That's always the risk with experimental treatment. But doing nothing guarantees death. At least this way, Star Whisper has a chance. The dragon made a soft sound, almost like a whisper. King Thaxor's expression changed, his anger replaced by something deeper. Love, fear, and desperate hope mixed together. Star Whisper chooses to trust you, he said quietly. Against all logic, my oldest friend believes in human medicine. Sarah nodded and pressed the injection device against one of the largest parasites. The bioorganic disruptor hissed softly as it delivered its payload directly into the parasite network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the barnacle-like growths began to pulse in a different rhythm. It's working, Sarah breathed, watching her scanners. The false signals are propagating through their network. They're getting confused. Dr. Korath moved closer to examine his own readings. Impossible. The quantum entanglement is destabilizing. How did you know this would work? I didn't, Sarah admitted. But I had to try. That's what human medicine is all about. Trying everything until something works. The parasite's pulsing became irregular, then began to slow. One by one, the barnacle-like growth started to darken as their life force ebbed away. Star Whisper's breathing became easier, and the dragon's natural coloring began to return to its pale scales. King Thaxor stared in amazement as centuries of friendship was potentially being saved by a species he had dismissed as primitive. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in his golden eyes, but Sarah knew the battle was far from over. The parasites were dying, but their death could still poison Star Whisper's system. The next few hours would determine whether her gamble had saved the dragon's life or simply changed the manner of its death. 6 hours after the injection, Star Whisper was showing remarkable improvement. The parasites had stopped pulsing entirely, and many of the smaller growths had already begun to shrivel and fall away. The dragon's breathing was stronger, and its eyes held a clarity that had been missing for months. King Thaxor stood beside his companion, running one of his 4 hands gently over the dragon's neck. For a brief moment, Sarah saw past the arrogant ruler to the man who genuinely loved this magnificent creature. The bond between them was obvious. 2 ancient warriors who had faced countless battles together. The improvement is temporary, Dr. Korath announced, studying his readings with obvious disappointment. The parasites are dying, yes, but their decomposition is releasing toxins into Star Whisper's bloodstream. The dragon will die from poisoning instead of energy drain. Sarah's heart sank as she confirmed the readings on her own equipment. The Zephyrian healer was right. Her treatment had solved one problem only to create another. The dying parasites were indeed releasing a cocktail of biological toxins that Star Whisper's weakened immune system couldn't handle. King Thaxor's expression hardened as he processed this information. The brief hope in his golden eyes transformed into cold fury, and he turned that anger directly on Sarah. So the great human healer has succeeded only in changing the manner of my friend's death, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. How wonderfully advanced your primitive medicine proves to be. I can still fix this, Sarah said quickly, her mind already racing through possible solutions. The toxins are a complication, but they're not insurmountable. I just need more time to— Time? King Thaxor's laugh was harsh and mocking. You speak of time as if you have any right to it. Your fumbling has already wasted precious hours, and now Star Whisper suffers even more than before. The king began pacing around the medical bay, his massive frame radiating anger. I should have known better than to trust the fate of my oldest friend to a species that still uses crude chemical compounds for healing. Your people have been in space for what? Barely a few centuries? And yet you presume to know better than civilizations that have practiced medicine for millions of years. Sarah felt her own anger rising but forced herself to remain calm. Getting into an argument with the king wouldn't help Star Whisper, and the dragon's condition was indeed getting worse. The toxin levels in the creature's bloodstream were climbing steadily. Your Majesty, Dr. Korath interjected smoothly. Perhaps it would be best to end Star Whisper's suffering now. The human's interference has only prolonged the inevitable. No, Sarah said firmly. I can neutralize the toxins. I just need to synthesize a specific antidote. Give me 12 more hours. King Thaxor stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that could have melted steel. 12 hours? You ask for 12 hours while my friend dies slowly from poisons you introduced into its system? The parasites would have killed Star Whisper anyway, Sarah protested. At least now we have a chance to save— Oh, silence. Thaxor roared, his voice echoing off the medical bay walls. I have heard enough of your excuses and false promises. You dare to stand there and lecture me about chances while your failure poisons the most noble creature in my realm. He gestured dismissively at Sarah's equipment. Look at your pathetic devices, cobbled together from scavenged parts and held together with hope. My empire's medical technology is older than your entire species. And yet you thought you could succeed where we failed? Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she refused to back down. Human medicine has saved lives that others considered hopeless. We might not have the most advanced technology, but we have something your empire seems to lack: the willingness to keep trying when others give up. Keep trying. King Thaxor's voice rose to a bellow. Your trying has sentenced my friend to a more painful death. This is what human arrogance accomplishes, turning a merciful end into prolonged agony. Dr. Korath nodded in agreement. The human's pride blinds her to reality. She cannot admit that some problems are beyond solution. Star Whisper made a weak sound, and all three turned toward the dragon. The creature's breathing had become labored again, and its scales were taking on a sickly green tinge from the spreading toxins. Time was running out fast. I will not allow this charade to continue, King Thaxor declared. Dr. Korath, prepare the mercy protocols. We will end Star Whisper's suffering before the human can cause any more damage. Wait. Sarah stepped between the king and his healer. I know I can fix this. The toxin structure is similar to compounds I've treated before. You need to accept that you have failed, Thaxor interrupted coldly. Your species' reputation for stubbornness is well deserved, but clinging to false hope serves no one, least of all my dying friend. He turned away from Sarah dismissively. Guards will escort you back to your quarters. Your services are no longer required. Sarah felt her heart breaking as she looked at Star Whisper. The dragon's eyes met hers, and she could swear she saw understanding there, and perhaps even forgiveness for her failure. But she wasn't ready to give up, even if the king had lost faith in human capabilities. I won't abandon a patient, she said quietly, but firmly. Not while there's still a chance. King Thaxor's expression was one of pure contempt. Then you will watch from the observation deck as we do what should have been done hours ago. Perhaps witnessing the consequences of your arrogance will teach you the humility your species so desperately lacks. As the guards moved to escort her away, Sarah's mind worked frantically. She had one last idea, dangerous, untested, and likely to fail. But it was better than giving up. The observation deck overlooked the medical bay through reinforced transparent aluminum. Sarah pressed her hands against the barrier, watching helplessly as Dr. Korath prepared the euthanasia protocols. King Thaxor stood beside his dying friend, whispering words in the ancient Zephyrian language that sounded like a final goodbye. Star Whisper's condition had deteriorated rapidly. The dragon's breathing was shallow and irregular, and the green tinge in its scales had spread across most of its body. The toxins were winning, and Sarah knew that in a few more hours it would be too late for any intervention. Captain Martinez, the station commander, appeared beside her at the observation window. The veteran officer had seen his share of medical miracles and failures, and his expression was sympathetic but resigned. Dr. Chen, maybe it's time to accept that you did your best, he said gently. Sometimes the best medical outcome is preventing unnecessary suffering. Sarah shook her head vigorously. I can still save Star Whisper. I have an idea, but I need access to the medical bay. The king won't listen to me. He's a sovereign ruler who just watched you make his companion's condition worse, Martinez replied. From his perspective, human medicine has failed spectacularly. I can't blame him for losing faith. Through the window, they watched Dr. Korath activate a crystalline device that would painlessly stop Star Whisper's heart. The ancient Zephyrian method was considered the most humane way to end suffering. A gentle energy pulse that would simply cause the dragon to fall into eternal sleep. But as the device powered up, alarms suddenly began blaring throughout the medical bay. Star Whisper's body convulsed violently, and the dragon's eyes snapped open with an intensity that startled everyone present. What's happening? King Thaxor demanded. Dr. Korath frantically checked his readings. The toxins are interacting with the euthanasia field. The combination is causing massive neurological activity. Instead of peaceful death, Star Whisper was experiencing something like a seizure. The dragon's powerful tail lashed against the medical restraints, and energy crackled along its scales in chaotic patterns. The creature was clearly in agony. Shut it down, Thaxor roared. I'm trying. Dr. Korath replied, his hands flying over the controls. The device isn't responding. The quantum field has destabilized. Sarah watched in horror as the situation spiraled out of control. The dragon was suffering far worse than before, caught in some kind of quantum feedback loop between the toxins and the euthanasia field. If something wasn't done quickly, Star Whisper would die in excruciating pain. Open the door, she told Captain Martinez urgently. Dr. Chen, you're not authorized. Open the door now, Sarah shouted.
That dragon is going to die in agony if I don't act immediately.
Martinez hesitated for a split second, then activated his override codes. The observation deck's security door slid open, and Sarah ran toward the medical bay at full speed. Behind her, she could hear the captain calling for security, but she didn't care about the consequences. She burst into the medical bay just as King Thaxor was trying physically to restrain his thrashing companion. The dragon's eyes were rolled back, showing only white, and foam was coming from its mouth. Get away from me, human. Thaxor snarled when he saw her. Haven't you done enough damage? The quantum fields are amplifying the toxins. Sarah shouted over the alarms. Your euthanasia device is making everything worse. Dr. Korath looked up from his frantically beeping instruments. The human speaks truth. The energy cascade is beyond our ability to control. Sarah dove for her medical kit, which had been left behind when she was escorted out. Her hands shook as she prepared a neural stabilizer, a human invention that was considered crude by galactic standards but might be the only thing that could break the quantum feedback loop. What are you doing? King Thaxor demanded. Saving your friend's life, Sarah replied, moving toward Star Whisper with the stabilizer. This will disrupt the quantum field and stop the cascade. Your primitive device will only make things worse. Look around you. Sarah gestured at the chaos in the medical bay. How much worse can it get? Star Whisper let out a sound of pure agony, a roar that seemed to shake the entire station. The dragon's life signs were becoming increasingly erratic, and Sarah knew they had minutes at most before irreversible brain damage occurred. Without waiting for permission, she pressed the neural stabilizer against the base of Star Whisper's skull. The device was designed to interrupt chaotic electrical activity in the brain, exactly what was needed to break the quantum feedback loop. You will kill my friend. Thaxor grabbed Sarah's arm with crushing force. I'm trying to save him, she gasped, fighting against the king's grip. Let me work. The neural stabilizer hummed to life, sending carefully calibrated electrical pulses into Star Whisper's nervous system. For a moment, the dragon's convulsions intensified, and Sarah thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The thrashing ceased. The energy crackling along Star Whisper's scales faded. The alarms fell silent as the dragon's vital signs stabilized. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was everyone's heavy breathing. Star Whisper's eyes opened, clear, aware, and pain-free for the first time in months. The dragon looked directly at Sarah and made a soft sound that could only be interpreted as gratitude. King Thaxor stared in amazement. How did you know that would work? Sarah slumped against the medical table, exhausted from the adrenaline rush. I didn't, but sometimes you have to take risks to save a life. That's what being a doctor means. Dr. Korath was studying his instruments with obvious confusion. The quantum cascade has completely stopped. The toxin levels are dropping. This should not be possible with such primitive technology. Maybe that's the point, Sarah said quietly. Sometimes the simple solution is the right one. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with a focus and determination that impressed even Dr. Korath. The quantum cascade had been stopped, but Star Whisper was still fighting the toxins from the dead parasites. The dragon's condition had stabilized, but it wasn't improving fast enough. The toxin levels are dropping too slowly, Dr. Korath observed, studying the latest blood work. At this rate, permanent organ damage is inevitable. King Thaxor had remained at Star Whisper's side since the crisis, his earlier anger replaced by a mixture of hope and lingering skepticism. Can you accelerate the process? He asked Sarah. Sarah was bent over her portable laboratory, synthesizing compounds that didn't exist in any galactic medical database. I'm working on it. The problem is that Zephyrian physiology processes toxins differently than most species. Your livers are incredibly efficient, but these particular toxins bind to proteins in a way that makes them hard to filter out. She held up a vial of pale blue liquid. This is a chelation compound I've modified for Zephyrian biochemistry. It should bind to the toxins and make them easier for Star Whisper's liver to process. Dr. Korath examined the compound with his scanner. The molecular structure is unlike anything in our databases. How did you design this without years of testing? Human medical research is different from yours, Sarah explained as she prepared the injection. We don't have the luxury of spending decades perfecting treatments. When people are dying, we have to innovate quickly. We use computer modeling, educated guesses, and sometimes plain intuition. She approached Star Whisper with the injection. The dragon watched her with those intelligent eyes, and Sarah could swear the creature understood what she was trying to do. There was trust there, something that King Thaxor still hadn't fully granted. This treatment could fail, Thaxor said quietly. My friend has already endured so much. All treatments could fail, Sarah replied. But the alternative is watching Star Whisper die slowly. I'd rather take the risk. She administered the injection carefully, monitoring the dragon's vital signs for any adverse reactions. For several minutes, nothing changed. Then gradually the toxin levels in Star Whisper's blood began to drop more rapidly. It's working, Dr. Korath said with obvious amazement. The chelation is proceeding faster than our most optimistic projections. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with simply treating the symptoms. While the immediate crisis was being managed, she had noticed something in the original scans that bothered her. The parasites hadn't chosen Star Whisper randomly. They had been specifically attracted to something in the dragon's biochemistry. Dr. Korath, I need to see Star Whisper's medical history going back at least 5 years, she said. The Zephyrian healer's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of confusion. What relevance could old records have? The parasite infection is recent. Maybe, maybe not, Sarah replied, pulling up genetic analysis software on her tablet. Parasites usually need a specific biological environment to thrive. Something made Star Whisper particularly susceptible to this infection. King Thaxor leaned forward with interest. Star Whisper has always been healthy. The finest care, the best nutrition, regular medical examinations. Sarah studied the medical records that Dr. Korath reluctantly provided. Years of data scrolled past her eyes. Dietary supplements, exercise regimens, battle injuries, routine treatments. Everything looked normal until she noticed a pattern in the vitamin injections. Here, she said, pointing to a series of entries. Star Whisper has been receiving enhanced calcium supplements for the past 3 years. Why? To strengthen the bones and scales, Dr. Korath replied. It's standard practice for dragons who see combat regularly. Sarah ran the supplement composition through her analyzer. This isn't just calcium. There are trace minerals here from the Shadow Nebula region, the same region where you encountered the parasites. King Thaxor's eyes widened. Are you suggesting the supplements made Star Whisper vulnerable? I'm suggesting they turned your dragon into a walking dinner invitation, Sarah said grimly. These trace minerals are exactly what the parasites need to establish their quantum entanglement network. Star Whisper has been carrying the perfect host environment for months. Dr. Korath's scales darkened with shame. I prescribed those supplements myself. I was trying to make Star Whisper stronger. You couldn't have known, Sarah said gently. The parasites from the Shadow Nebula are probably a new mutation. But this explains why the infection was so severe and why traditional treatments failed. She turned to King Thaxor. The good news is that once we flush out these minerals, Star Whisper will be naturally resistant to reinfection, but it means we need to completely purge the dragon's system. What does that involve? Thaxor asked. Sarah was already calculating dosages and treatment protocols, a combination of mineral chelation, cellular regeneration therapy, and genetic expression modification. I'll need to essentially rebuild Star Whisper's biochemistry from scratch. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Dr. Korath said. It is, Sarah admitted. But it's also the only way to ensure this never happens again. Right now, Star Whisper is still vulnerable. Another exposure to these parasites could be fatal. King Thaxor looked at his companion, who was resting more peacefully than they had seen in months. The dragon's natural coloring was slowly returning, and its breathing was strong and steady. How long would this treatment take? He asked. Several days, Sarah replied. And it will require constant monitoring. Star Whisper's body will essentially be rebuilding itself at a cellular level. There will be moments when the process looks like it's failing. But you believe it will work? Sarah met the king's golden gaze steadily. I believe in giving patients every possible chance. That's what human medicine is built on. The refusal to accept that anything is impossible. For the first time since their meeting, King Thaxor looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. "Begin the treatment," he said quietly. "My friend has already trusted you with his life. Perhaps it's time I did the same." 3 days into the cellular regeneration treatment, Star Whisper looked worse than ever. The dragon's scales had dulled to an unhealthy gray, and its breathing was labored as its body fought to rebuild itself at the molecular level. King Thaxor paced the medical bay like a caged predator, his forearms crossed tightly as he watched his oldest friend suffer. "This is madness," Dr. Korath muttered, checking his instruments for the 100th time that hour. "The dragon's cellular matrix is completely unstable. We should stop this treatment before irreversible damage occurs." Sarah remained focused on her monitors, tracking hundreds of biological processes simultaneously. She had barely slept in 72 hours, surviving on stimulants and sheer determination. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her hands remained steady as she adjusted treatment parameters. "The cellular reconstruction is proceeding normally," she said calmly. "Star Whisper's body is essentially rebuilding itself from the inside out. It's supposed to look chaotic right now." "Supposed to?" King Thaxor's voice was strained with worry. "You're gambling with my friend's life based on theory and hope." Sarah looked up from her workstation, and for a moment her exhaustion showed through her professional composure. "Your Majesty, I understand your fear, but this is how human medicine works. We don't have millennia to perfect our treatments in laboratory conditions. We adapt, we improvise, and we trust in the resilience of life itself." Star Whisper suddenly convulsed, his massive body shaking the medical table. Alarms blared as his vital signs spiked dangerously high. Dr. Korath moved toward the emergency shutdown controls, but Sarah blocked his path. "Don't," she shouted. "This is the critical phase. His old cellular matrix is fighting the new one. If we stop now, he'll die for certain." "He's dying anyway!" Thaxor roared, moving toward his companion. "I will not watch you torture him in the name of your primitive experiments." Sarah stepped between the king and the medical table, her small human frame dwarfed by his massive presence. "Trust me, please. I know this looks terrifying, but Star Whisper is fighting for his life right now. The least we can do is fight alongside him." The dragon's convulsions intensified, and for a moment Sarah thought she had pushed too far. Then gradually the shaking began to subside. Star Whisper's vital signs fluctuated wildly before suddenly stabilizing at levels stronger than they had been in years. The change was dramatic and immediate. Color began returning to the dragon's scales, not the sickly pale white of the albino condition, but a magnificent pearl silver that seemed to glow with inner light. The creature's breathing deepened and steadied, and when Star Whisper opened his eyes, they were clear and bright with restored health. Dr. Korath stared at his instruments in disbelief. "This is impossible. The cellular regeneration is complete, but the genetic markers have changed. Star Whisper's DNA has been rewritten." "Not rewritten," Sarah corrected, slumping with exhaustion and relief. "Restored. The albinism was a side effect of the mineral contamination. I've essentially given Star Whisper back his original genetic expression." King Thaxor approached his companion with wonder in his golden eyes. The dragon that looked back at him was the same beloved friend but transformed. Star Whisper's scales shimmered with natural iridescence, and the creature's bearing showed a strength and vitality that had been missing for years. The dragon made a sound that was pure joy, a musical note that resonated through the medical bay like a song. Star Whisper's wings, which had hung useless for months, spread wide and strong. The creature was not just healed, he was magnificent. "I don't understand," King Thaxor said quietly, running his hands over Star Whisper's transformed scales. "Our greatest healers examined him for years and found nothing wrong with his genetic structure." "Because you were looking for disease," Sarah explained. "The albinism wasn't a natural condition. It was environmental damage that occurred so gradually that it seemed normal. Sometimes an outside perspective can see problems that have become invisible to those who live with them every day." Dr. Korath was still studying his readings with amazement. The quantum field generated by the parasites actually accelerated the genetic restoration. The human used the very mechanism that was killing Star Whisper to heal him instead. "That's impossible with our technology," Thaxor said. "It's impossible with any technology," Sarah replied. "What made it possible was refusing to accept that anything is truly impossible. Human medicine isn't about having the best equipment or the most advanced knowledge. It's about adapting to whatever situation we face and never giving up on our patients." Star Whisper turned his great head toward Sarah and made another musical sound. This one clearly meant as gratitude. The dragon's intelligence was obvious in his gaze, and Sarah felt honored to receive such recognition from such a magnificent creature. King Thaxor stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing what had just occurred. His oldest friend had not only been saved but transformed into something more beautiful than ever before. And it had been accomplished by a human using methods that his advanced civilization had dismissed as primitive. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "And more than that, I owe you my understanding of what human medicine truly represents." Sarah shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Your Majesty. Star Whisper's recovery is reward enough." "No," Thaxor said firmly. "I dismissed your species as primitive and arrogant. I mocked your methods and questioned your competence. But you have shown me something my people have forgotten in our millennia of advancement." He gestured toward Star Whisper, who was now stretching his wings with obvious pleasure. "You have shown me that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is the willingness to never surrender. That wisdom is not always found in ancient knowledge, but in the courage to try new approaches when old ones fail." Dr. Korath bowed deeply to Sarah. "I too must apologize. Your medicine is not primitive, it is revolutionary. You have accomplished what our most advanced treatments could not." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Different doesn't mean better or worse. It just means different. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs. Different perspectives working together instead of competing against each other." As if understanding her words, Star Whisper made another musical sound and gently nuzzled Sarah's shoulder with his great head. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate, and it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She had saved more than just a dragon's life. She had built a bridge between species that might change how humans were perceived throughout the galaxy. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching as King Thaxor and Star Whisper prepared for their departure. The dragon's transformation remained remarkable. His pearl-silver scales caught the light of distant stars, and his movements showed a grace and power that spoke of perfect health. Captain Martinez joined her at the viewing port, carrying a data pad filled with reports from across the galaxy. "You've caused quite a stir in the medical community," he said with a smile. 3 different alien governments have requested exchanges with human medical personnel." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought most species considered our medicine primitive." "That was before news spread about what you accomplished here. The Zephyrian Medical Council has formally requested access to human treatment protocols. The Andromedan Healers Guild wants to establish a joint research program. Even the Crystalline Collective is asking questions about human adaptation techniques." Through the viewing port, they watched Star Whisper spread his magnificent wings. The dragon's flight capabilities had not only been restored, but enhanced by the genetic correction. Where before he had been limited by the weakness of albinism, now he moved through space with the natural grace of his species. King Thaxor approached the station's docking bay entrance, flanked by his royal guard. But instead of the arrogant ruler who had arrived 2 weeks ago, he carried himself with a new humility. The experience with Star Whisper had changed him in ways that went beyond gratitude. "Dr. Chen," he said, offering a formal bow that surprised everyone present, "I have come to bid you farewell and to extend an invitation." Sarah returned the bow respectfully. "What kind of invitation, Your Majesty?" "The Zephyrian Empire would be honored to host a human medical facility within our territory. We have much to learn from your approaches to healing, and perhaps we can offer knowledge in return." He paused, his golden eyes serious. "But more than that, I want to ensure that no healer ever faces the prejudice you encountered here." Dr. Korath stepped forward, carrying a crystalline data storage device. "I have compiled detailed records of your treatment methods. With your permission, I would like to share them with healing centers across the galaxy." Sarah accepted the device carefully. "Knowledge should be shared. That's how we all grow stronger." King Thaxor nodded approvingly, wisdom spoken like a true healer. "But there is something else." He gestured toward the docking bay where Star Whisper waited. "My friend has a request." The dragon had positioned himself so he could see through the viewing port. When he noticed Sarah watching, he made that musical sound she had come to associate with gratitude and happiness. But there was something else in the dragon's expression, a sadness that seemed almost human. "Star Whisper wishes to thank you personally," Thaxor explained. The bond between dragon and rider runs deeper than most species understand. He knows that without your intervention we would both be mourning an irreplaceable loss. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. The thanks belonged to him. He trusted me when he had every reason not to. That kind of faith makes healing possible. They made their way to the docking bay where Star Whisper waited with obvious patience. The dragon's presence was even more impressive up close. The restored vitality in his movements, the intelligence in his eyes, the sheer magnificence of his bearing. As Sarah approached, Star Whisper lowered his great head until it was level with hers. The dragon's eyes held depths of understanding that seemed almost impossible in a non-sentient creature. Then gently he pressed his forehead against hers in a gesture that needed no translation. He says that you have given him not just life, but the chance to fly among the stars again, King Thaxor translated quietly. In our culture, such a debt can never be repaid. There is no debt, Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. Healing isn't about obligation. It's about compassion. Star Whisper made another musical sound and stepped back, his wings spreading wide in what could only be interpreted as a salute. Around the docking bay, Zephyrian guards and station personnel watched in amazement as one of the galaxy's most magnificent creatures paid homage to a human healer. King Thaxor extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. You have changed more than just one dragon's fate, Dr. Chen. You have changed how my people view humanity itself. That may prove to be the most significant healing of all. As the Zephyrian delegation prepared to depart, Captain Martinez pulled Sarah aside. The Galactic Medical Council wants to offer you a position as Director of Interspecies Medical Relations. It's a new post created specifically because of what you've accomplished here. Sarah watched through the viewing port as Star Whisper took flight, his movements a perfect display of restored power and grace. The dragon performed a series of aerial maneuvers that could only be described as a celebration, loops and spirals that painted joy across the starfield. Will I get to treat patients? She asked. Martinez smiled. Every species in the galaxy will be your potential patients. Then, I accept. As Star Whisper and King Thaxor disappeared into hyperspace, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to the medical bay expecting to treat a dying dragon. Instead, she had discovered that the greatest healing often happens not in the body, but in the barriers between different ways of understanding the universe. Human medicine would never be the same. But more importantly, neither would the galaxy's perception of what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept that anything was impossible. In the distance, other ships were already approaching Harmony Station, representatives from civilizations that had heard about the human healer who had saved a king's dragon. Each one brought new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to prove that sometimes the most advanced solution was simply the refusal to give up. Sarah smiled and headed back to the medical bay. There was work to do,